The One D&D Warlock has got me really mixed up. I've been trying to write this video for a few days, but I just kept stopping because I was really struggling to actually condense my thoughts into anything resembling a coherent message. I've been all over the place with this one, from loving it to hating it to being sort of 50-50 on it, and then even just during the process of writing the script, I'm back to not really liking it again. And I think it's all really because this iteration of the Warlock is one of the most bizarre combinations of great, good, bad, and terrible that we have had during the One D&D playtest, but all at the same time. This video will have a bit of a different structure than my typical class overview, so stick around for the next 10 minutes or so and we can discuss just what exactly happened here and why I'm not really feeling this new version of the Warlock. I've always had a bit of a mixed relationship with the 5th edition Warlock. The class has always heavily appealed to me from a flavor and lore perspective, but it was always such a mechanical outlier that I never felt like I was really able to sink my teeth into it. Now, this is likely because I am the classic forever DM, so I rarely get the chance to play, but that's not to say that I don't like the class. I do. Very much so, in fact. The Warlock to me has always represented something of a DIY class, where the Bard was sort of capable of being generally good at most things. The Warlock offered a lot of customization options that enabled each one to truly feel different. On top of that, its unique spellcasting system, Pact Magic, was interesting in and of itself, and really highlighted the fact that Warlocks were not just another derivative spellcaster. I think in order to properly evaluate this new iteration of the class, that it's important to compare it against the criteria that Jeremy Crawford established in his latest video about this UA. In the video, he set some goals and targets that I truly think are fantastic, but it's just in the execution of those that I think the design team fell a little bit short. Firstly, he mentioned that the team wanted to address concerns that the player base have had about the class over the last 8 years, but particularly focusing on the massive survey that they did back in 2021 about the 2014 Player's Handbook. In regards to the Warlock, the most common piece of feedback they received were how few spell slots they get, and the fact that those spell slots were tied to a short rest, rather than the long rest like every other caster. I think it's pretty safe to say that most Warlock players would generally agree with these design goals. Jeremy makes a great point that I'm sure that anyone who's ever played the class has come to realize very quickly, and that is because of how few spell slots Warlocks have access to, maxing out at only 4, even up to 20th level. In a lot of cases, it felt like you have effectively 0 slots, since you feel like you really need to make each use count, so you might hold on to it and ultimately may not even ever end up using it at all. Or, the inverse is also true, you simply burn them way too quickly and are then relegated to cantrips or some weapon fighting. In either case, it can make for a bit of a lackluster experience. Now, I can already see the comments go, so I'll just say right now that I know that there are a subset of players who absolutely love this really tight decision making that the 5e iteration of Pact Magic created. Every spellcast felt meaningful since you really had to be sure about what you wanted to cast and when you wanted to cast it. I am not taking anything away from those people. I can certainly see the appeal. However, as a design team is focusing on making the game as broadly enjoyable as possible, that simply isn't the direction that they've gone with. But I do think that there could be a bit of a better balance. As a result of trying to remedy the feedback that they've received, the team has opted to instead remove Pact Magic and replace it with spellcasting. Specifically, half-casting, which is essentially the same type of spellcasting that we see with Rangers and Paladins. This type of spellcasting receives more available spell slots, but only maxes out at 5th level spells all the way at 17th level. Now, I have some thoughts about this. Firstly, and this is more of a personal opinion, half-casting doesn't thematically fit for me. To me, where the Paladin and Ranger represented a form of warrior, holy, or nature that happened to have access to magic and spells, the Warlock to me always felt like a magic user that happened to have training with some weapons and armor, so keeping all 3 classes on the same magical progression just kind of feels wrong. Secondly, and if you've been paying attention, this should be pretty obvious, the team never mentioned any feedback about Pact Magic being the problem. The feedback was that Warlocks didn't have enough spell slots and they were tied to the short rest. To me, this seems like a great opportunity to revamp Pact Magic rather than dump the concept entirely. But here's the dilemma. I can certainly understand their desire to want to unify their design language and not have one outlier class that casts spells so differently than the others, but to that I'd say, why not? Again, as far as we know, Pact Magic wasn't the source of the majority of the feedback. Additionally, it's not like we don't already have systems that are similar but differ between classes. Most obviously and relevant, there is already the half-casting and full-casting split. But beyond that, we have some classes with extra attack that others don't. Fighters can change weapon masteries, but barbarians can't. Wizards can create and modify spells, but sorcerers can't. Sorcerers can augment their casting with metamagics, but other casters can't. The wizard has to scribe their spells in their spellbook, but no other caster has to. My point is that there are so many ways that the classes share features but execute them very differently, including already having divergent spellcasting systems, so I struggled to see how pact magic was the problem here. If anything, while I will concede that it might be a bit jarring at first glance if you're already used to other spellcasters, it's actually easier to use since you don't have the added complication of managing spell levels. The only real reason I can see that they've made this choice is to streamline multiclassing with the Warlock. But beyond all that though, this move actually runs directly counter to one of the design goals that Jeremy stated for the Warlock, which is to give it more of its own mechanical identity. Well, this isn't that. Another stated goal was to provide a satisfying level progression experience, and here is where things get a little more complicated. Let's start with spell progression since we've already been discussing that. Spell slots progress much more quickly than they did previously. Take a 5th level Warlock. In 5e, they would only have access to 2 spell slots. However, in this iteration, they have access to 6. Having triple the amount of spell slots is a massive jump that can really help alleviate the issue of feeling like you can't ever actually cast your spells unless it's at the perfect time. This is a great change. It makes the leveling process feel much more meaningful and lends itself to the idea that the Warlock really is a magical being. What doesn't feel as great is spell slot progression. That same 5th level Warlock in 5e would have access to 3rd level spells. However, in One D&D, they were only just getting access to 2nd level spells and won't gain 3rd level spells until 9th level. This dramatically slower rate of progression is continued throughout the leveling process. The One D&D Warlock won't gain access to 5th level spells until all the way at 17th level, something their 5e counterparts would get at 9th. This almost seems crazy to me. Sure, on the one hand, you now have access to far more spell slots, which allows for greater flexibility in terms of casting spells and in the variety of what you cast, which is great. But on the other hand, your magic now feels so comparatively weak that I hesitate to say if the trade-off is really worth it or not. Now, in the mind of the designers at Wizards of the Coast, this is all balanced against the new version of Mystic Arcanum, which is now an invocation rather than a class feature. So let's talk about that and how the invocations contribute to the level progression feeling meaningful. Mystic Arcanum is now an Eldritch invocation, which you can take once you've obtained 5 levels in Warlock. You can now select any spell from the entire arcane spell list, provided that it is one you qualify for, as determined by the Mystic Arcanum table. The invocation now allows you to gain access to spells as low as 3rd level while being a 5th level Warlock. This matches the previous class progression, but it now requires you to dedicate an invocation to it, and therein lies the problem. Invocations have received a bit of an overhaul, including the fact that you now gain a total of 9 rather than 8 throughout your career, and many have had their power levels improved or altered. Gaze of Two Minds, for example, has been changed from requiring an action to only needing a bonus action. You're no longer blinded and deafened, and you can now cast spells from the space of the creature whose mind you are occupying. Life Drinker has a lower level requirement and deals additional damage. Lessons of the First Ones is a new invocation that grants an additional feat to the character. And while all that is great, there are still a few problems. Overall, the invocations still feel too weak when compared to class features, which I suppose is fair considering you get more of them than you would features. However, the bigger problem is that many feel so weak that they fail to compete with Mystic Arcanum, which, as mentioned, is now an invocation. As a result, the situation that you are left with is this theoretical world where you can have the option to build a Warlock where you don't really focus on spells or gaining higher level spell slots, so you avoid Mystic Arcanum, but the options that you're left with are so dismal that you feel like you're intentionally gimping yourself for no benefit. Or you just go ahead and pick Mystic Arcanum at least 3 or 4 times, which effectively reduces your total invocations from 9 down to 5 or 6, creating far less variety than was likely intended. What I'm trying to get at is that the new invocation system as presented in this UA feels a bit underwhelming. While there are 25 choices, 9 of them require the Warlock to be at least 9th level or higher, and too many feel so niche that you'd almost never pick them. And others grant access to low-level spellcasting without the use of a spell slot. This is something which felt critical in the 5e version of the class, but now feels redundant due to the spellcasting changes. I'm not saying that invocations need to be amazing or even as good as class features, but I think that many more should be revisited and many more should be added so it really feels like there is true diversity in the picks. And oh yeah, Mystic Arcanum should really just go back to being a class feature, and can we please just make Devil's Sight also grant Dark Vision? Now that we've got all that out of the way, there are a few other changes present within this UA that I actually really do like, and I wanted to highlight them before the end of this video so it's not all negative. But first, Hexmaster, is this actually a joke? Anyway, I love that Warlocks now essentially have the ability to choose their spellcasting ability modifier. It's such a unique flavor piece that manifests itself in an interesting mechanical twist that we haven't really seen before in 5e, and I'm here for it. As far as spellcasting goes, there actually was a subtle but massive change that I am also so excited to see. Warlocks can prepare spells not simply according to their available spell slots, but in any combination now. This is actually true of all of the classes in the mage group, including the wizard and sorcerer. This has been something that I've been complaining about since we first saw the bard and ranger spellcasting back in the expert classes UA. Whether this is something that will be changed in future iterations of those class, or if it's something exclusive to the mage group remains to be seen, but I really hope that it's a change that everyone gets access to. I love that Dark One's Blessing now triggers even if you didn't land the killing blow, and I'm thrilled that the class's expanded spell list has been done away with in favor of a new feature called Patron Spells, which, similar to Clerics, grants a subset of spells that are always prepared, and one of which can be cast for free per long rest. At the end of the day, I really don't think that the One D&D Warlock as presented is that bad. I think it can absolutely be salvaged, but it raises the question of whether any of the effort of these reworks were actually put in the right place. I truly believe that they could have achieved many, if not all, of the design goals that they set out to achieve without hitting the class in such a dramatic way. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing to my channel as it massively helps other people find my content. Let me know in the comments what you think about the new Warlock and check out some of my other One D&D videos. Otherwise, take care.